This happened over 20 years ago now. I was driving back home with my girlfriend at the time. It was Christmas Eve and my mother's family used to hold a large celebration at my aunt's house. This was my girlfriend's first time meeting my extended family, but she got on quite well with them. We spent the majority of the afternoon and evening just talking, playing poker, opening presents, and drinking an assortment of adult beverages. My girlfriend had been quite tipsy by the time that we had to leave, so I would be doing the driving us home. It was around 11 p.m. or so. I was driving my girlfriend's car along Highway 211. Now, this stretch of the road is surrounded by farms and dense patches of forest, and parts of it are sort of unlit. But nothing to fear. I grew up in this area, so I knew this road like the back of my hand. The both of us were just driving and talking away, just two young lovers making the most of our moment together. And there's a portion of this highway that descends down an enormous hill before crossing Deep Creek. Surrounding both sides of the road, there are thick forests, and there's no lights there, obviously, and the only thing that we could see was the area directly in front of our headlights. I drive down the hill, cross the bridge, and uphill through more forest, and it's as the highway starts to flatten out that it happens. Something sprints across the road so suddenly that I almost hit whatever it was. I slam on the brakes. I turn to my girlfriend and ask her if she saw it too, and she confirmed that she had, but she couldn't make out what it was either. Maybe it was a coyote, as they are a fairly common sight in this area. But something just felt off about it. Whatever it was that ran in front of the car, it disappeared into the woods next to the road. Coyotes don't usually just sort of dart out in front of cars like that. Not like that anyway. So for some reason, I decided to check it out. I turn the car around and I switch on the high beams to better light up the forest in which this thing had vanished in. I even step out of the car and I walk towards the woods. I don't see anything at first, but now it feels like perhaps I'd made a grave error because my heart was pounding and the hairs on the back of my neck are standing at full attention. But I still don't see anything unusual in the trees. When suddenly, the car's horn blasts. It's not a beeping too that you'd get if you say your driver or passenger wanted you to hurry up and get in the car or something. No, this was a long blaring beep. I walk back into the car and I ask my girlfriend why she leaned on the horn like that. She didn't say anything, and instead she pointed to a spot about 50 feet from where I was standing. I looked over in the direction, and that was when I saw it. Surely this was the thing that ran in front of our car. It was a man, and he was completely naked. His skin was covered in dirt and mud, and in one of his hands he was holding something that looked like a hatchet. He looked back at us, and then he smiled and waved to us just before turning around and just walking back into the forest. Needless to say, we got the heck out of Dodge, and once we were safely driving again, my girlfriend explained what had just happened. While I was trying to look for the man in the area he initially vanished in, he circled back around and came out from another spot in the forest, beyond my car headlights. My girlfriend, thankfully, had seen something out of the corner of her eye, and that's when she saw him. But before she honked the horn, he was allegedly walking towards me too, his hatchet raised as if ready to make the strike. We called the authorities once we got back home safely, but they never found anybody, or if they did, they just didn't tell us. But the officer that we did speak to explained his theory and said that the man was obviously looking to ambush unsuspecting lone travelers for Lord only knows what reason. And we all agreed that my girlfriend's quick thinking saved my life that day, as it let my potential killer know that I wasn't alone out there. I actually moved back into the area recently too, so I now drive that highway often. No naked hatchet man sightings yet, but I can tell you that I'm definitely extra vigilant these days, especially near Deep Creek. So my mum was really good friends with her family up the street. She would take us kids to go and visit with her all the time, in fact, and every time my 2-year-old, at the time, sister, saw a certain male of the family, she would just start screaming her head off. And yet my mum still kept visiting them or letting them come over. Fast forward 4 years later, though, and the creepy man's wife passes away. She left their small daughter behind, and we come to find out that the dad got arrested for molesting the daughter. I guess my sister just got a bad vibe from this guy, and she was spot on. A few years later, though, I'm 12 years old and home alone. Another one of these family members stops by my house, and since I know him, I let him in. He asks to see my room. He's about 20 years old, but me being young and naive at the time, I oblige. And as soon as he's in my room, he grabs my face and tries to kiss me. I pull away quickly and asked, what the heck does he think that he's doing? And he said that I had gotten so pretty, which made me feel sick. Luckily, we both heard the front door open and slam shut, so he rushed out. My mum realized that something was up, though, and never let anyone from this family ever come around again. This experience occurred when I was about 15 or 16. I was also with a friend of about the same age, and his dad too. We were in the woods behind our houses. We lived in the same neighborhood. We went into these woods many times to hike around and play paintball and whatnot. And one day, we decided to go a little bit deeper into the woods just to, check it out. A little background too is that this is an old growth forest protected wetlands that are a few square miles and surrounded by roads on all four sides, located in the northeast of the US. For a while we were just wandering along, and it was mid-late spring, so the forest was pretty lush and green, when one of us sees a small patch of white coming through the woods. It stood out pretty easily in contrast to the green leaves, so we decided to investigate, and the three of us headed off in the direction towards this mysterious white spot coming through the leaves. Now, if you've ever walked through dense woods before, then you'll know it's difficult to walk in a straight line because of fallen logs and brush and whatnot. Well, we keep walking, though, towards this object for what seems like a while. I've racked my brain, but really can't recall how long, too. But this white object still hasn't come into focus. It still looks like a white blot, and it's just as far away as when we first spotted it. We didn't think too much of that at first, or at least I didn't, and continued walking in this direction. It must have happened 2 or 3 times that we'd walk towards this thing for a few minutes, stop and notice that we still weren't getting any closer. At this point too, I think there was a little bit of tension building, but nothing too out of the ordinary. At some point though, as we're getting closer, we notice the object is starting to fill out. We can clearly see now that it's a tiny white house on a hill. I'd say the structure was about the size of a shed that you might keep a lawnmower in. We were excited too because, well, how often do you come across something like that? It's still a little ways away, but again, very obvious this little white house is what we had seen and been walking towards. So as we continue towards this little house, we lose it from sight momentarily as we go up and over another hill in front of it. But as soon as we get to the top of this hill, the small white house is just gone. We sort of just stand there confused, looking at each other, but then continue walking up the hill that we had previously seen this house on. This last part happened really quickly too, but we get to the top of the hill still looking at the other hills close by to see if maybe we just got turned around or something, and we'd see the little house until one of us noticed an old foundation in the ground at the top of this hill, exactly where the house had been. The shape of the foundation was exactly the size of this mysterious vanishing white house, and I barely had time to notice the foundation when all 3 of us heard growling that got louder and louder until it must have been as loud as a chainsaw. Nothing was said too, but the 3 of us, including my friend's dad, just sprinted out of the woods in the direction that we came. I don't recall ever discussing what happened with the 2 others I was with that day, but man, was it freaky. Since this happened, I've tried looking on Google Maps for maybe some kind of an indication that the house was there and we just lost it, but the forest is just too thick to see anything. About 1.5 years ago, I told my brother what had happened, and We went back into those woods looking for this house, or the foundation at least, but we didn't find anything. Although our search wasn't very thorough because it was winter, so it was pretty cold, and with snow on the ground it was hard to pick out what might be the white house from the surrounding snow. Long story short though, we never saw that house again. When I was 13, the dawning of a new millennium took place on New Year's Eve. While people were fearing the worst with the Y2K bug, or out partying and drinking, I was home alone. In 1996, my parents had split up, and from there they divorced, and my mother and I moved across the country from Oregon to Tennessee with her best friend. On the eve of the year 2000, I was home alone, and my mother was currently out of state. Now, this didn't worry me, as this was not the first time. I often came home alone to find a note on the kitchen counter saying that they'd gone to Florida for a few days and that there were groceries in the fridge and whatnot. Since the divorce, she was regularly leaving me alone for long periods of time to go to Florida. But we lived on a relatively quiet road surrounded by trees and set a few miles out of town, and I knew most of the people, if not by name then by face, enough to wave and small chat with, and had never before been given a reason to be afraid of being alone. On the night in question, though, I was staying up late watching television. I remember that I was watching the movie His Bodyguard on USA Channel, and had most of the lights on in the house. Not because I was afraid, but because at 13, I wasn't really concerned with electricity bills or saving the environment. I felt completely safe and protected with my little bubble of a home. As I was watching the movie, though, I kept hearing these weird sounds outside. But I remember thinking that it was probably just the neighbours. Though they weren't extremely close, a couple of them were having a party and people over for the holiday season. And about halfway into the movie, however, the power in the house just suddenly went dead. I sat on the couch for a minute, just sort of in a panic daze, because it was near midnight and pitch black. I remember thinking the power must have gone out and that it would come back on. So I just decided to sit on the couch with my blanket and wait it out. A few minutes passed by when I heard a noise in the kitchen where the back door is. And my heart started racing in my chest because I thought it sounded like the back door being shut. The back door sits just off the dining room, which is connected to the kitchen, which leads directly into the living room where I was currently sitting on the couch. A few seconds passed after I had heard the sound, and I was straining my ears to pick up anything that wasn't supposed to be there. Every noise suddenly felt magnified, and when footsteps sounded on the floor, I immediately slithered off the couch onto all fours, crawled around the ottoman, and started as slowly and as quietly as I could to make my way toward the space between the love seats and the couch. I knew that I could fit under the side table and be completely hidden by the dark in the ottoman, from playing hide-and-go-seek in the dark many, many times with my friends during sleepovers. I was nearly there when the footsteps became more apparent. I knew from the sound of them that whoever it was making their way through the kitchen now toward the living room. They weren't hurried or anything. It was like they were just moving around in the kitchen. I glanced up from where I was crouched on the floor, and to my horror, there was a dark silhouette standing in the archway between the two rooms. To my credit, I didn't scream, but I did panic. I stood immediately to my feet from the hiding spot and ran down the hallway, and I believe the only reason why I wasn't overcome was because the person chasing me had to get around the ottoman in the dark to follow me. I did what all children do when they're afraid, and I bypassed the front door, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, and ran to the farthest door down the hallway, my room. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have been able to even get to the front door, unlock it, and open it in time, as it was right off the side of the couch. When I was 10, I got a bird for my birthday. He was a blue-fronted Amazon, and I named him Boo. Because it was October and close to Halloween, Boo had a large iron cage. It could have been metal, but very large and sturdy and like 6 feet tall, and it was kept in my room despite the fact that Boo, like me, pretty much had the run of the house whenever he wanted. Now, as I ran into the room, I slammed the door shut and I locked it. However, the lock was simply one of those little turn knobs that you could easily pop with a butter knife. I had barely gotten the door shut and locked when the person on the other side knocked on it. I have no idea why they knocked, if they did it to mock me or to scare me, but I knew in my heart that my little lock was not going to keep whoever it was on the other side out of my room. I mean, it didn't keep my mother out when we were arguing, and it wouldn't stand up to brute force. I was panicking and on the verge of tears when the person started laughing. It was low, quiet, and because of that, it was even more frightening. It wasn't like manic laughter, but it was as if they were genuinely amused. And it was that laughter that really frightened me, and I started heavily, hysterically crying and looking around my room to figure out what I could do. That was when I realized that Boo's cage would fit almost perfectly between the door and the wall of my closet. The cage moved quietly on my carpeted floor, but as I pushed it into place, it scraped against the door and alerted whoever it was on the other side that I was trying to barricade myself in. Because suddenly, they threw themselves at the door, and you could hear the sound of the wood splintering and the door handle being twisted violently. Boo, who had been stirred by the movement, awoke and began literally screaming and flapping his wings. I might have screamed with him, but honestly, I don't remember screaming, and I just remember being extremely scared. Terrified, I crawled under my bed, well, couch. It was a bunk with a futon on the bottom, metal, and then I just waited. Several minutes passed, and the person eventually stopped attacking my door. Boo continued screaming even after he'd stopped, and though being under my bed gave me no feelings of being secure, I didn't come out from under it because I simply had nowhere else to go. I thought about trying to go out the window, but I was afraid that he might expect it and therefore be waiting for me on the other side. And it was also several feet off the ground, as the house was built on a raised foundation. I remember laying under my bed terrified for what felt like hours, honestly. I must have fallen asleep too, because I awoke the next morning to daylight. The fear of what happened came back to me as soon as I registered where I was and why, and scared that whoever had been in my house might still be there. I decided to crawl out the window and run to a neighbor since it was daylight outside, and therefore I felt less afraid. Crawling out of a window is actually a lot harder than it looks, and I did it less than gracefully, as I was not, and still am not, the most coordinated human being. But once I got back on my feet, I carefully made my way around the house, and that's when I noticed that the back door was wide open. Scared, but feeling braver now that I was outside and that it was morning instead of pitch black night, I walked up the back steps and peered inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, no terrifying man leering at me, basically, I decided to go inside. Looking back, I cringe on how stupid I was and just how this could have turned out, and I wish I could have told my younger self to make the smarter move and just go for help, but thankfully, no one was inside the house. I did a terrifying, heart-pounding room-to-room check, looking in closets and under beds, behind the couch, and anywhere I thought that even a small child might be able to fit. I even popped the lock on my mum's bedroom so that I could check it, and then relocked it afterwards. And when I was positive that there was nobody there, I went back to lock the back door. I had left it open in case I needed to escape, and noticed that the breaker box in the opposite wall was open, and that the main switch had been pulled. I flipped it back on, locked both locks on the back door, checked all the windows in the front door, and then I called my mum, where I once again broke down crying hysterically. She called a co-worker who came and stayed the entire day with me as they drove back. My mum still took random trips to Florida after that, but I always went with her from then on forward. Oh, and by the way, my mum actually had to help lift me back into the bedroom window so that I could move Boo's cage out of the corner between my bedroom door and the closet, and we never had another incident at the house, and we moved into town to an apartment about a year later.